Hey everybody, and welcome to Lesson 19's lecture. I'm going to be going over one of my favorite examples today. It's just super fun, and it's available on my CS121 examples repository. The project is called Clone Myself, and it's available underneath the GUIs folder in the examples folder of my examples repository. So if you want to visit it and download it yourself, it's there. Looks like I accidentally got these Eclipse files in there, but these three files and the JPEG are what really matters for this one. I'm going to use it to talk about subpanels and layouts in Java graphics, and then after that you'll have the tools you need to get started on your activity 19. But don't just use me as the teacher. Go ahead and read the book. The book layout files are linked on the lesson in Blackboard. If you go to the lesson and then go to lesson 19 and go to, sorry, you won't see this bit because it's for professors, but go to the assigned pre-reading and the PDFs for the section are linked there. So make sure you're going to these guys to get the reading. Remember that the graphics in the 5th edition, the textbook that you all have, are different than the ones that we use, and these chapters are no longer in there. So we made copies of the 4th edition stuff so that you guys could use it, just because you're going to be reading from there. Anyways, without further ado, let's go over the example. So we have this clone.exe program. It's pretty fun. Just creates a super simple JFrame, adds a clone panel, which is another Java class I have defined down here. And when we run it, we get a super fun program going. Because I didn't set the initial size, it does start super small and just fits the button. But if I expand it a little bit, notice I get Nick Cage just copied over and over again. And as I click, he just fills the screen. The larger I make the screen, his pictures grow, and the more we can fit. Pretty disturbing, to say the least, but also pretty fun. So how do we make this happen? Well, notice his pictures are appearing in the grid. That's by design. That's not an accident. And you have to have those set grids where the rows and columns are have a certain number of subcomponents. In this case, the images. We have to set a layout to make that happen. Notice that clone panel extends JPanel. So clone panel is a JPanel, and recall that a JPanel is just basically a blank canvas that we can add other graphics components to. Now the cool thing is that we can set a layout on JPanels so that the components that we add to the JPanel arrange themselves in a certain way. There's a couple different kinds of layouts. Primarily we use border layout, grid layout, and box layout in CS121. And I've used all of those except for box layout in this program, although I have included a comment describing how to set a box layout, which you'll be using in activity 19. And the layouts are you set them in all different ways depending on the type of layout. So this panel is actually set in a border layout. So our clone panel has a border layout. Now what the border layout does is it allows you to arrange your panels in sections like this. I'm going to draw it out for you. If we were to draw a rectangle, and this is our J-frame, well, supposedly. Oh, it's because I'm on the eraser. There we go. So, suppose this is our J-frame. And we're going to type just J-frame here. And let's rotate that guy, whatever. Let's move him. And now we have to switch back to our original layer. Now the cool thing is that border layout has a couple different sections. We've got the center, we've got the west, the east, and the north and south. And this is just a rough outline. And so if we were to add text, we got border layout dot north. This guy would go up here. Got border layout dot south. This guy is this section of the JPanel down here. And then we've got border layout dot west. And this guy goes here. And I think you get the rest of it. Let me see if I can scale this bad boy. Apparently not. There we go. That's what I wanted. And so, of course, the other subpanel over there is a border layout dot east. And they all sit inside of our, well, we've got our J-frame and then we've got our J-panel. I'm actually going to go ahead and move this guy outside just to show that all of this is kind of sitting inside our J-panel. And then really what this would be our clone panel. Because our clone panel has the layout set to a border layout. So the clone panel is this whole big thing, and these are the different sections sitting inside of it. And in the middle is border layout dot center. There we go. I'm pretty happy with that. So this is our clone panel, this big thing. And these are the different sections of the border layout. So that might not make a ton of sense at first, but if we run this, and if we were to make this window pretty big so we can kind of visualize it, and I'll hit the clone me button a couple times. Notice the button's way down here, and our grid is right here, centered in the center of our J-frame. And notice as I start making more, it still stays pretty centered. Well, the clone panel is the outer J panel that contains everything, and we set its layout to a border layout. Then we create our button with the clone me text on it. We add the clone button listener to it, which is what adds those images to the J-frame. But then we create a subpanel, and this is the other topic that this lecture is about, is subpanels. Notice that we create another just plain old J panel here. This isn't a clone panel. It's not like a control panel or whatever we're making in activity 19. It's just a plain old J panel. And notice we set its layout to be a grid layout. And then we add our clone button to this, which is the clone panel, to the border layout dot south. So this clone button here, right down here at the bottom, has been added to the border layout dot south section of our clone panel. And then to the border layout's center, we add the clone group, which is our grid, our J panel that's in a grid layout. And grid layout takes a parameter. It takes the, well, let's see, let's hover over it. Creates a grid layout with a specified number of rows and columns. All components in the layout are given equal size. One, but not both, of rows and columns can be 0, which means any number of objects can be placed in a row or column. So I made it so that there can be as many rows as you want, so I don't have to specify that many, but there's always going to be 5 Nicolas Cage images across. And so that, and notice you call set layout on the J panel that you're setting the layout of. So this would be the clone panel. That's why we are able to add the button to border layout dot south and the clone panel to the border layout's center. So Notice the button's down here and the grid's kind of here in the middle. Now these sizes are exaggerated. Basically, if you don't have a west, the center is going to expand to take up the whole west space. That's why our clones stretch from all the way across the J panel. The south is going to expand to the whole bottom as well. So just know that the border layout does kind of flex a little bit in that way. And then notice our clone group we call set layout. So we're setting our clone group's layout to be a grid layout. So the layouts are applied to the J panels, and whatever J panel invokes the set layout method is going to have that layout. And notice you create the layout, it's an object, and you pass it into the set layout method. Notice the border layout doesn't take any constructor parameters because it just by default sets up your sections like this. However, the grid layout needs parameters. It needs to know how many rows and columns your grid is going to have. And when you're adding components to a border layout, notice it has some special features. That there is an add method that takes a parameter called, in this case, constraints, and it helps the J panel know how to add things to it. So because the clone panel, being this, is set to a border layout, you can pass a border layout section to the add method in the component. So in this case, the clone button gets added to that section. So the clone button got added to border layout.south, so down here. And the clone panel got added to border layout center, so in the center. So those are just the basics of the layout. And I'll talk a little bit about the box layout later during activity 19. It has some quirks. It's probably the hardest layout to use of the ones that we talk about. And then I just want to point out that I created this private helper method. A helper method is a method that doesn't necessarily need to exist, but it exists to kind of separate out logic. Notice in our clone button listener that gets added to our clone button, we call this add clone method that I've defined here. So you can define private methods and split up your listener functionality if you want to. I could have just as easily done this inside of the action perform method, but I wanted to create a separate method to handle it to kind of separate out that logic. Notice to our clone group, we just add a new JLabel, and we create that JLabel in the parameters of the add method. And we also, inside the JLabel constructor, well, there is a JLabel constructor that takes an image icon, and we create that image icon, we pass it a file name of the image we wanted to add, and we pass it. Now, if I comment out that revalidate line here, down here, like, like it says to do in this comment here, I'm going to comment that out, and let's stop the program and run it again and see what happens. I'd encourage you to download this example and play around with it. Well, let's see what happens now that we've commented out that revalidate line. Notice that nothing happens. So with resizing your J-frames, it automatically resizes elements. But when you add elements, you have to call this revalidate method. And notice it's this.revalidate. Revalidate is a method of the JPanel class, and what it does is it checks for any components that have since been added to your JPanel, and and if something's been added, it refreshes the JPanel and adds that thing. So notice after we add a new JLabel with the image on it, we revalidate and we now check and add the new JLabel with the image on it. So I know that was pretty quick. I hope that helps with layouts. They're not actually too bad to use, but they are kind of a trip to understand at first. And so I wanted to devote a separate lecture to it. I almost made this combined lecture and activity video, but I thought it'd be good to go over this example with you. So I encourage you to check it out. And with that, let's get started on the activity. Happy coding, everybody.